In the beginning, computers took up entire rooms and were more of a fantasy than a reality to the average person. That was until the introduction of the two-player single-frame games that established the $117.7 billion industry 80% of households experience every single day called video games. The very first video games were made on oscilloscopes, laboratory instruments commonly used to display and analyze the waveform of electronic signals. These now simple devices were programmed with the basic Newtonian physics and gravity, and from there, video games became an instant possibility. The first ever video game was created by nuclear physicist William Higginbotham in the Cold War almost accidentally. During an open house in the lab, he decided to stray from the boring open rooms and use the publicly inaccessible computers to create a game called Tennis for Two. In the game, players controlled their player on each side of the net to hit the ball back and forth. The game brought more people than Higginbotham could have ever imagined, but without a patent, Pong took its place about a decade later. In 1962, Steve Russell created the first video game played at more than one location, Space War. Built for the new PDP-1 computers, Space War included the same features like physics, gravity, and an analog controller. In this game, players were in a dogfight between two spaceships in an asteroid belt in the middle of space, fighting against each other while gravitating and orbiting around an unknown object in the middle. The software created at MIT was passed around to other universities to create games in the future that we know well. In this era, one name in the video game industry that everyone knew was Ralph Baer, or the father of video games. He tried to get into the video game industry before anyone else, but constantly denied. He had to take in his comrade Bill Harrison to test his idea of gaming on a TV. His first idea was the Brown Box. The Brown Box was the first multiplayer, multi-program video game console, and it was designed for a TV, which many Americans at the time had. The box was later bought by Magnavox and paved the way for our consoles that we know today. The 1970s brought a new era in gaming called arcades. One of the most revolutionary and first games in this era was Pong by Alan Alcorn in 1972. Atari, a then small gaming company, had the idea to create a game that resembled the game of ping pong. The job was given to Alcorn, and in 1972, Pong was introduced to the world. Pong grabbed wide-scale attention for the first time, and machines were in every single bar and restaurant, and in 1975, homes. One of the only games in 1970 that was not multiplayer was Space Invaders by Tomohiro Nishikado in 1978, but it deserves a spot on this list because of its over $500 million in revenue and the yen shortage it caused in Japan after Taito struck gold with this shooter game. In the game, the player moves the human horizontally across the screen while shooting aliens and defeating levels. Yet another multiplayer title on this list, Tank by Key Games in 1974, was definitely a game that deserves to be on this list. Key Games was originally created to be with Atari and to be a fake competitor, but creating games like Tank made them accidentally an enemy. In this game, players controlled tanks through a maze, avoiding mines and opponents' fire. This game's huge success was the main cause for the merge back between Atari and Key Games. As you may have noticed, the very first video games constructed were all multiplayer in order to serve as an alternate solution to spend time with others in a new fun way. Obviously, this aspect of the games was successful due to the overwhelming results, but it was in the late 70s where the video game industry took a turn towards solitude. Now gamers were enticed to a new breed of solo player games that became a way for the average person to escape everyday life. This brings us to Galaxian in 1979 by Namco and Midway. One of the most advanced games of its time, Galaxian brought colors and sounds and a popular space theme that later developed into one of the most well-known games of all time, Galaga. After poor sales from the first Mega Man, Capcom was determined that the series could be successful and were rewarded with Mega Man 2 in 1989. The simple yet effective graphics enticed gamers abroad, and the game had the highest sales of any Mega Man since. Yet another very important game of this period was Galaga by Namco and Midway in 1981. The second game in the Galaxian series, Galaga, was a game where players controlled a spaceship that multiplies with progress. In the game, players use this spaceship to attack the Space Fleet, or Galaga aliens. This game was hugely popular from then until now. Donkey Kong by Nintendo in 1981 was one of the most revolutionary single-player arcade games of our time. Shigeru Miyamoto's new character, Jumpman, soon to be Mario, created the outline of a barrel-dodging, girlfriend-saving arcade game that supercharged the industry. In this game, players controlled Jumpman to dodge the barrels while climbing up and getting to Donkey Kong to save its girlfriend. In this game, players used Jumpman or Mario to dodge the barrels and climb ladders all the way to the top to defeat Donkey Kong. A decade of single-player games, Contra by Konami in 1987 had to be one of the most popular. One of the most popular run-and-gun games, Contra quickly became a favorite among gamers in an era of virtual violence. With 3 possible camera angles, players controlled gorilla-like characters while mowing down enemies. The style brought players and the innovation brought dedication, and that made for a very successful game. In 1986, Nintendo came out with the hugely popular Legend of Zelda. The first of the Zelda series, The Legend of Zelda, introduced us to the protagonist Link and the colorful world that sculpted the Zelda games we have today. In the game, users control Link through an intricate levels that remained present in the games ever since. Legend of Zelda introduced us to a new type of roleplay in video games that became an inspiration for many video games today. In 1980, Taito released Defender, a very hard but strategic and fun game in all arcades. Known as one of the most difficult titles at the time, Defender was a very popular game across consoles and arcades. In the game, players would attempt to navigate a difficult terrain while eliminating aliens and enemies on the way. This plot made it a very fun game for many people, and because of this, it ended up on our list. Elite by David Braben in 1984 was a title no one saw coming. From a back alley office in Britain, David Braben created the first 3D and open-world space game. Adored by fans abroad, Elite was a revolutionary game that allowed players to search the galaxy and complete missions on their own time. In 1990, Sierra Studios released Half-Life. Considered one of the greatest video games of all time, Half-Life brought next-gen graphics and fun gameplay that got the game over 50 Game of the Year awards. Combining this with an FPS shooter made the game very revolutionary and fun for everybody to play. In 1991, Sega released the title Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic was a fast-paced and colorful game on a powerful new processor which immediately made the game wonderful. With massive commercial success, Sonic became a favorite with multiple versions in the future. The game's popularity was mostly due to its colorful and fast pace. This allowed players to genuinely enjoy the game whilst not spending that much time on it. At the time, there were not a lot of fighting games, but Midway's release in 1992 of Mortal Kombat gave the genre a real name. The gore and 5-button controls introduced a new fighting game called Mortal Kombat. Players used characters varying from superheroes to zombies to rip the opponent's head off in a taunting way. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater by Activision in 1999 was one of the very first extreme sports game to really take off. Since the beginning, extreme sports were implemented into video games, and these were almost always proved unsuccessful until Activision teamed up with the world-renowned skater Tony Hawk. While skating around a semi-open world, players pulled off combos and tricks that made the game really fun to play. One of the very first successful MMORPGs was Final Fantasy VII by PlayStation in 1997. Known as one of the most revolutionary and popular MMORPGs of games in general, Final Fantasy VII brought a dystopian roleplay that hadn't been seen before. Greatly successful, Final Fantasy VII was a new and exciting game that deserves to be cited. GoldenEye 007 by Rare in 1997 was one of the most revolutionary first-person shooters and one of the first. Known as a historical advance in video games, the intense first-person shooter GoldenEye 007 introduced the gory and addictive games we play today. This game paved the way for games like Call of Duty and Battlefield in the future while bringing a huge revenue on its own. Pokemon Red and Blue in 1998 from Game Freak was the first in the very popular Pokemon series. Following the show that was drawing countless Americans, Game Freak released their first Pokemon in the US. Pokemon Red and Blue was truly the most famous foreign series, and the game continued for many years to come. Mario 64 in 1996 by Nintendo was the start of one of the most popular series in video game history. In 1996, Nintendo introduced a 64-bit video game featuring everyone's favorite Italian. Players controlled Mario through various puzzles and worlds, all while constantly progressing. The fast-paced and action-packed game allowed players to not only have fun, but experience what Mario was experiencing through the journey. Gran Turismo by Cyberhead in 1998 is considered by many as the pinnacle of a genre. Gran Turismo introduced high-speed gameplay for those interested and those who were not. Automobile fanatics and new players could enjoy the revolutionary racing game, and that is what made it such a remembered game. In 1992, Nintendo released Super Mario Kart, a different style of a racing game that brought more color and more of a fun aspect. Introducing the colorful racing experience, Nintendo brought Mario Kart. Up to 2 players had the choice of characters like Mario and Bowser to play while they sped across the fantasy lands of Mario's world. Driver by Ubisoft in 1999 was an open-world game that was Grand Theft Auto before Grand Theft Auto. Players were brought to the game for openness and high-speed cop chases, and this aspect of the game brought an enormous popularity that would soon flood into other games. Resident Evil 3 by Capcom in 1999 was one of the most revolutionary and first horror games. Horror games have become a fan favorite, and the very first and most famous ones went under the name Resident Evil. One of the most successful in the series, Resident Evil 3 brought fear into video games like no one had ever done before. Although at the time Resident Evil was one of the most known titles, Silent Hill by Konami in 1999 definitely deserves a spot for the differences it has. Although Resident Evil is considered the father of horror games, Silent Hill introduced a sense of tension and suspense that hadn't been seen before. In the game, players controlled the character through the trademark fog, building up paranoia and a jump scare, and this made the game very special. One of the biggest game genres in our day and age is first-person shooters, and one of the best and well-known titles of first-person shooters was Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 2 by Infinity Ward in 2009. Arguably the most revolutionary first-person shooter, Modern Warfare 2 brought friends online for hours at end. The legendary multiplayer brought insane amounts of fans and a new culture of gaming to the industry. In 2008, Rockstar released GTA 4. Initially released on the revolutionary new console, the Xbox 360, GTA 4 brought a new style and genre of play into the industry. Though it contained many disturbing and questionable parts, GTA 4 is still considered one of the greatest games and shows its success through its countless accolades like the countless gaming world records it set. While Microsoft's Xbox competed with the PlayStation's 3 for raw graphics and processing power, Nintendo made a genius decision to target a different group of people, the casual players. In 2006, Nintendo came out with the Wii console. The Wii was an inexpensive and easy-to-control console that was simple enough for new players but competitive enough for the hardcore gamers. This console sold more than all the Xbox 360s and PS3s combined, which truly shows what a smart decision Nintendo made. In 2005, Microsoft released its by far most popular and most highly demanded console of all time, the Xbox 360. During its release, the Xbox 360 brought features in a console never seen before. Movies, music, demos, and popular games were all available on the game console, and for that, the success was outrageous. Households worldwide purchased the Xbox 360, playing some of the most iconic games on it. Coming with ergonomic controllers, within 2 years, there was over 10 million consoles sold. Developed for PC computers, World of Warcraft by Blizzard in 2004 was truly one of the most impressive and successful PC MMO games of all time. MMOs had never really had a hit game until the release of World of Warcraft in 2004. This enormous free world role player allowed players to create and live the life of an alter ego in a fantasy land. The game had enormous sales and is still played today by millions. With so many first-person shooters coming out, it was hard for an individual game to stand out. Halo 3 by Microsoft in 2007 did just that. It stood out. Halo accomplished this by creating a game with the futuristic and terrestrial plot not seen before. It sold 300 million copies in the first week and had over 1 million people playing it in the first 20 hours. Another game that used great tactics to avoid regular first-person shooters was Ubisoft when they created Far Cry in 2007. Ubisoft hit the jackpot with their first-person shooter game, Far Cry. Players controlled a man on tropical island through mercenaries and dangerous terrain and graphics unlike anything before it. Combining this with the first-person shooter playstyle really made the game stand out. Just like Ubisoft, Bethesda Studios in 2008 created Fallout 3 to stand apart from the first-person shooters. Another game that took some risks to stick out was Fallout 3. The intriguing post-apocalyptic gameplay became enticing, and it kept the general aspects of other loved games. The out-of-this-world gameplay and stunning graphics truly made this a remarkable game. Another famous way to stray from the path was Santa Monica Studios' God of War in 2005. The God of War series starts in a historical fiction. The mythology became very interesting to viewers, and the series continued to astound. The game featured a third-person angle with very intense and gore battles that became insanely addicting to gamers. Just like Modern Warfare 2, another Activision counterpart, Treyarch, released Black Ops 2 in 2012, which, just like MW2, was considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, first-person shooter of all time. Arguably the best of the Call of Duty franchise, Black Ops 2 was a first-person shooter set in the near future. Campaign, multiplayer, and zombies were some of the gameplay features, and each one is vividly remembered. Before the explosion of Fortnite, there was one Battle Royale game that trumped all the others, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, or PUBG for short, released by PUBG in 2017. Battle Royale games were once almost non-existent until PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, or PUBG, put the genre on the map. The realistic game allows players to enter a 100-player free-for-all, and the last one standing wins. Skyrim by Bethesda Studios in 2011 was one of the first fantasy games that developed an enormous following. The game received enormous amounts of praise for its design and open-world capabilities. In the game, players were able to choose their destiny in their own player's experience, which made the game very intuitive while being very fun. Rockstar's 5th edition in the GTA series, Grand Theft Auto V in 2013, is almost 100% the greatest video game of all time. The 5th edition to Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto series, Grand Theft Auto V, had a triple protagonist story mode along with an intense online mode with 30 player sessions. It is the third best-selling game of all time, and with a revenue of $6 billion, it is the most financially successful entertainment product of all time, over movies, music, and sports. This brings us to our last game, Fortnite Battle Royale by Epic Games in 2017. With roughly 45 million players, Fortnite Battle Royale has completely swept the nation through media and pure conversation. The Battle Royale aspect of the game derives from the Save the World version, which had a very little following. A rapid, non-cosmetic growth struck the 100-person free-for-all, and now everyone from celebrities to toddlers play the addictive game. Now let's get the viewpoint from someone in the industry.
But actually what's changed the most is the way games connect different people together and get them to play together. So, Grand Theft Auto Online, right? So Grand Theft Auto 5, that original game, a really amazing game, but still quite self-contained. Grand Theft Auto Online is an incredibly innovative thing because it creates almost infinite possibilities and infinite ideas.
Yeah.
So, last year my favorite game was Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild on the Switch because it really encapsulated everything that I loved about video games growing up. I mean, Nintendo is very good at creating like a magic around games, but it's got quite a magical feel to it. But it also has complete open world freedom. It has, it almost pulls all the influences from all these things I talked about and feed them back into one video game. So I love that. Skyrim I mentioned, definitely one of my favorite games of the last few years. I still play that 5 years later when I get time. What else do I like from the last few years? Overwatch is a game I really like as well. So Overwatch, a multiplayer kind of like competitive game. I don't play a lot of those games. I don't really like Call of Duty, but I loved Overwatch. I think it's really terrific. Well, I mean, the big kind of technology that people are still trying to figure out is virtual reality and augmented reality. So virtual reality, the idea of putting a headset on and transporting yourself somewhere else, and then augmented reality, the idea of putting stuff on the world that you're seeing around you. No one's really cracked it yet, but also we're very early in the technology for virtual reality, so I mean, the headsets are still bulky.
Yeah.
In 10 years' time, virtual reality headsets will look like my pair of glasses, right? So once that stuff is much more accessible, I think you're going to see some really interesting ways that stuff will get implemented into games. So yeah. So I think this is consistently true, and it's changed how people do it. But the most enjoyable thing about gaming is gaming with other people, right? My fondest gaming experiences are sat in a friend's bedroom, age 7 or 8, playing on a Nintendo console, or a home computer. In the same way, some of my favorite adult gaming experiences were reconnecting with old friends and playing Destiny together, or playing World of Warcraft together, and chatting on headsets, and so that social thing has never changed, and it's always been the thing that that's what I always think is frustrating, because a lot of people, when they talk about gaming, think of it as a solo thing. For me, gaming has always been a social thing. It's always been a thing that I've used to connect with friends, and so even though that's changed, I might not be sat next to the person I'm playing with. I might be chatting to them on a headset, and they might be in London and I might be in San Francisco, but that social thing is still the same.